I recently made a post and remembered a fun encounter that might go as a warning to those who work late at night. I was a 24-year-old at the time, working at a nightclub about 10 minutes away from my house, walking distance. I used to close on Tuesday nights slightly earlier than most nights, as it was generally our slowest night of the week, closing at around 12 instead of keeping customers until like 2:30 in the morning like usual. Usually I'd be the only one left, as I'd start cutting staff as the night went on, and since it was the slower day of the week, we didn't have security on. About 2 months in of regularly closing at 12, I was walking home. I used to bring in bulkier clothes to hide my figure when leaving alone, as I've been followed and chased home multiple times before, and we'd often get men waiting outside after hours for us girls to come out, knowing we'd eventually come out after closing. I didn't want to attract attention to myself. I also used to walk home as I didn't have a car, and had a few terrifying experiences with Uber drivers not actually driving me home, turning out to be fake cabs/Uber drivers, or harassing me until I pretend to show interest, or give them some way of contacting me, to which Uber would just give me $5 coupons for the trouble, but that's a story for another time. The bar was located along a main road that was home to the majority of the other bars and restaurants in the city downtown. Often at this time, I'd maybe see a handful of people, but the streets were generally empty. I'm walking and I notice a parked car about a block away. The driver noticed his car. I don't engage and keep walking. We're maybe a block or two past the initial spot I saw him, and he's slowly driving alongside the sidewalk. I'd cross the street, but didn't want to get near his car. He keeps this up until about the halfway mark, when he takes off in his car, and I'm just relieved he's gone. Psych. Guess who comes back blasting down the road? He does. Now my walk has turned into a light jog, which then turns into a full-on sprint. I'm running behind closed bars and businesses now, trying to find a back route to get home without him seeing where I live. At one point, I'm running through bushes and mud. No matter what street I end up on, his car is waiting for me. Eventually, I run right in front of his car while it's parked on the side street beside my place and run into my house through the back entrance. The back entrance is obscured by plenty of trees and cars in the surrounding houses, so I was confident he didn't see what door I got in through. Fast forward to the following Tuesday, and I'm walking home again. Guess whose car's parked at the halfway mark? This went on for the next 4 Tuesdays, except he started parking on the street in front of my house until I begged my manager to take me off closing that specific shift. The last time I saw him, one of the apartment buildings along the way had a few cop cars and cops standing around the entrance. I stayed with them, and it made him drive off for the night. A week passes and I'm no longer on that shift. A coworker of mine sends me a news article via text. I open it and see that the man who's been following me was arrested for doing this to multiple girls in the city along the street my work was on and that I lived on. He got caught because he'd followed a university student up to her house and wouldn't drive away. She called the cops, and he was still there by the time they came to arrest him. He got out the next day, I believe, and was arrested a few more times and was put on restrictions. Couldn't be outside of his parents' house between certain hours unaccompanied by either parent. That was all before he was deported. I've also heard he didn't actually get deported, but I moved away shortly after and didn't keep up with the news on him. I can link the article if anyone wants. I don't live there anymore and wouldn't be giving myself away, so to the creep in the car who used to follow me and multiple other young women home, let's never meet again. I'm currently a 27-year-old female. At the time this story occurred, I was a senior in high school, angsty and steadily into partying. For this story, I'm going to hide her identity, solely due to the rules on Reddit. Let's call her Kay. Kay almost cost me my life, and I never want to see her again. A little backstory on Kay. She grew up privileged, given anything she wanted. Her parents adopted her 5 cousins, and this is when she started to rebel. Her parents, well off, started to pay less attention to her, so Kay had all the freedom in the world. At the time this incident occurred, Kay was 18 and I had just turned 18. We were headed to kick back at these guys' houses, and nothing more than a little bit of weed was expected. No, I had my share in smoking weed, popping pills here and there, I had just tried ecstasy the summer prior. However, I was planning on staying sober. She had picked me up, and we stopped to buy cigs at a gas station. I bought a fountain drink, one with a straw and everything. This is crucial for later in the story. We arrive at the apartment, and everyone is smoking, including Kay, but I declined. She would always say shit how she never wanted to be high alone, complain about how I never got high as her. So I obliged, and I cleared the bong off her hit, not even taking a full hit. She asked for a drink of my soda, and I handed it to her. She had it for a good minute. I had my head turned, talking to someone at the kickback. When I looked back at Kay, she was messing with my straw. I didn't think much of it, and she handed it back to me. Within about 30 minutes or so, I started to feel intensely high, to the point that I needed to escape from the group. I go out front to smoke a cigarette, only to find that I couldn't stand up, so I laid on the front porch. Then all of these dark thoughts flashed through my mind. I felt so sick, like my stomach was being torn open. I couldn't stand. I had to crawl to the bushes to throw up. I thought to myself, all of this off clearing a bong? So I laid back on the porch. The apartment was located on a busy street in the city I lived in. I also thought about running into traffic, because I felt like I was dying. So I gave myself two options. I could run into traffic, have a car hit me, and end this horrible pain I was in, or I could get some help, maybe flag someone down. My mind wasn't in the right state. I knew nobody at the kickback would take me seriously. I knew something was terribly wrong. I thought about calling my mom. I must have had dialed her number and hung up, like 5 different times. Finally, I called and told her what had happened, and I didn't know why I was so high. Nobody else was feeling the way I felt. What seemed like an eternity later, Kay came outside looking for me. As I'm puking my guts out into the bushes, she asked me if I want to get some food. I asked her if she was fucking serious. She laughed as I puked. What I didn't know is that my mother had called my older brother to pick me up, since he lived close to where I was. He showed up with a machete, ran inside, and threatened people. He didn't know who gave me what. It wasn't until I got home that my brother took one look at my eyes and noticed how dilated my pupils were, so he rushed me to the ER, after more puking, of course. My memory there was a bit fuzzy. I just remember asking my sister-in-law if I was going to die and telling her that I was scared. They ended up sedating me, due to the fact that I was yelling and threatening the nurses. Totally out of character for me. They did a tox screen, drug test, and found MDMA, the drug found in ecstasy, along with other drugs in my system. I'm assuming the other drugs were the ones used to make up the ecstasy. Now, this is all frightening and everything. However, what I found out a few days later shocked me to my core. Kay had been to a house party the next night. Somebody there said she was passing out free ecstasy to 4 different people. Of those 4 people, 3 had literal fucking seizures and had to be taken to the ER by ambulance. I'm assuming that whatever ecstasy she used had been a bad batch. Remember when she asked to have a drink of my soda? I assume this is when she dropped the pill inside, and it dissolved. She probably crushed it beforehand or something. I have no clue, but at this time in my life, I hadn't done drugs for quite a while, especially not ecstasy. Kay also went on to tell people that I was the one that slipped her the drug, and said that she had to go to the hospital. She's a pathological liar, and has had to go to therapy for a long time for mental disorders. All this happened because she wanted me to be high like her. I could have committed suicide because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. It still affects me to this day. It sounds cliche, but I have a hard time trusting people with this experience and among other things. I also don't like sharing drinks with friends. I get scared when I go out to a bar or club, fearing for the worst. I mean, if my own friend had done this to me, I'd stop being a stranger, so I always have my guard up, no matter what. So to Kay, let's not meet again. You'll need some sort of backstory to understand everything. I'll try to sum that up as briefly as I can. Okay, so I used to grow herb between 2008 and 2010, like a lot of herb up in the mountains. So, after we would harvest, I would come back to town and stay with my brother. He lived on sort of the edge of the bad neighborhood, so that made a great location for customers. Basically, I'd post up at an apartment and drive down to the liquor store to meet people, to keep traffic away from my place. The owners of the particular liquor store became very good friends of mine. They are Palestinian and smoked a lot of weed. Eventually got to the point where I would just post up by the door and chill with them, smoking out front, and people would come up and shoot the shit with us. They owned the store and worked it daily, so they kind of knew who was cool and who wasn't. Well, one day, this guy named Mike B, we'll call him, shows up. They told me that he was a decent guy, and so we talked some business. I had a truck that needed some work done, and it just so happened that he had the O-rings I needed. So we made some trades and continued to do business beyond that for about a year. I eventually let him come to my place, and he sold several pounds I had there. That was by mistake. I lined up another transaction which lagged for a while. All still went fine. He wasn't anything to be concerned about, I didn't feel. As time goes by, I notice him changing physically. He becomes a lot thinner, cheekbones protruding, and he seems wired a bit. I cut him out of the situation by telling him I no longer sell. Some months go by, and he calls me on December 17th and says, "Hey, do you happen to have any herb to sell? I have $100 burning a hole in my pocket." I should have just kept my original position and left it alone, because last I saw him, he seemed a bit weaker, but it was just before Christmas, and I really needed any additional money I could get, so I took the risk. He told me where to meet him, and I happened to have a friend over who had dropped me off. I normally would have driven my truck, but the tags were expired, and it was a far walk to my house anyway. So I get dropped off. Standing there in front of the store that's closed, I see Mike B crossing the street towards me a few minutes later. He seemed a little confused and asked me, "Where's your truck?" I told him I was dropped off, and he then kind of went into thought for a moment, then said, "Alright, let's head across the street. I'll get the money there." So this area is sketchy as fuck, and he leads me directly to a very, very dark, sketchy alley behind a townhouse complex. My intuition begins to set in. A little late, you know. I start to recall his words in my mind. I have $100 burning a hole in my pocket. Who the hell has any extra money a week before Christmas? I ask myself. I observed to my left 5 to 6 shady appearing individuals under a carport, drinking maybe. I don't know. I didn't look in their direction long, just enough to see the looks of no fucks given in few of their eyes. I just keep walking and assume they're good people, because I'm not one to judge someone by their appearance. So my mind is still going. Intuition is sending me small alarms. What am I doing? Do I need $100 this bad? He leads me to the back gate of an apartment complex that is a short distance further up that alley and stops me there. He is much smaller than me, and if it were one-on-one, I know I could take him, so I'm not too worried about Mike alone. He says, "Wait here. I'll go get the money from my girlfriend and be right back." I said, I'd rather not wait right here. Can we do this inside?" He responded, "She's weird about company, just hang on." And he walks through the gate. I observe him unusually peering through a window. Then he knocks really hard on a door, and then rounds the corner out of my sight. I'm feeling very uncomfortable now. That shit was weird. Why did he just do that? So I meld into the shadows some. A woman comes out, and it seemed like she instantly spotted me. I must have had been glowing white and standing out despite my intentions to meld. She said very sternly, "Fuck around here and get fucked up," and went back inside. I knew something was off. He couldn't have had any ties to that apartment at all. This is some kind of strange setup. I began to dwell on my intuition, and it tells me that he rounded that corner and is now at the front door of the townhouse where the 5 to 6 guys were out back of. My mind plays out the entire scenario vividly. He knocks on the front door, Swan lets him in, and he goes through the townhouse, out the back, and informs the 5 to 6 guys that the plans have been messed up and they'll need to improvise. They must have not overtaken us in the alley because their initial plan was to have me in the truck, which maybe they also intended on taking? I don't know. Anyways, so I have only 2 options. Do I go through the narrow walkway out through the apartments I'm standing in past the door he knocked on and potentially run into them and others on the street right there? Or do I go back the direction I came and past the exact spot where they were standing the last minutes I saw the group of them a few minutes ago? I have a gut feeling that they are on the street approaching the corner I last saw Mike round when he last vanished. I can almost see their red dots on the mini-map of my mind. I feel them all there, even though I don't see them. So, my intuition tells me to go back through the alley and pass where I last saw them, this time alone. That is the way I felt I needed to go. I follow my guts, and as I pass the carport where they all were, I see none of them are any longer there, so this gets my heart going. Where did they all run off to? Are they behind me? I look back. Darkness. I break into a sprint and get the hell out of there. Once I was far enough away and in the cuts near a store, I texted him, "Mike, what's up?" No response. I text again and again. No answer. I walk home nervously, keeping on a course they wouldn't assume I'd taken if they're following me. I get home and text again. I call and text, nothing. He's hitting forward on my calls on 3 rings. 1 ring, 2 rings, 1 ring. Okay, that's what's up. Now I know for sure what happened. My intuition was dead on. He intended on having me drive him into that alley, and those guys were supposed to block us in. He was going to play it as though he didn't know them, and they would check me for my weed in my truck. He and I would then be split up, I'm sure, and he'd meet with them somewhere else. He's avoiding my calls and texts for some reason. I knew things were off, and I felt my intuition so strong that night telling me which direction I could find safety, and kept to it. So a few days later, I'm at the store I met him at, telling my Palestinian friends that guy is no good. They're blown away by the story. Later, the store owner asked me if I want to go with him to Jay's house to burn one. I have only met Jay once, but he's an old school biker who lives around the corner. He's a good person to know, and I sensed that when I first met him, so I agreed. I would go along with the store owner buddy to Jay's house. We arrived and had a smoke session at his kitchen table. Buddy turns to me and says, "Jason, Jay knows Mike B too. Tell him your story just like you told me. I know I can trust this guy Jay. He has the most honest eyes I've ever seen. Striking light blue eyes. He looks a lot like Gandalf." So I tell him how it all went down. He then says to me, "I'll tell you something I know for sure about your intuitions. You have them 100% accurate that night. Mike B had my youngest son drive him behind a store about a month ago, where a few guys cornered them and began to beat my son through the window. It's almost the exact same setup, and you not having your truck that night clearly threw everything off from their usual routine. Crazy thing is, I was driving my truck along that very same street where I last saw Mike B as often as I could work it into my routes wherever I was heading, and one day, lo and behold, I spot him walking with a woman. He's about a quarter mile ahead, walking on the sidewalk on my side of the road heading towards me. I had my son with me in the passenger seat, so I couldn't do anything too irresponsible. So as I get closer, I slow it down to about 20 miles per hour. Speed limit is 40 there. I'm slightly veering to the right towards the gutter, towards Mike. At some point he sees me approaching in a way it shouldn't be from the road towards them. So he looks up dead into my eyes. I instantly jerk the wheel to the right towards him harder. He instantly puts his head down and continues walking forward. I veer back into my lane and drive home. I haven't seen Mike B for years until just recently, when I recognized him in front of me at a line at another corner store near the first place we met. I know his name, but I want to see how he plays it. It's been years. His forearm tattoos are unique. It's Mike for sure. I ask, "Hey, is your name Mike?" He turns around, eyes shifty, and says, "Nah, Jeremy." It turns back around. If my intuitions didn't already tell me I was correct, and Jay hadn't validated my intuitions, the way Mike instantly looked down again after making eye contact with me when I was swerving at him in the truck was all the evidence I needed to be sure he was looking to jack me. His actions in the store just cemented my beliefs. I'll always follow my intuitions. They never lead me astray. So when I was young, I went to that one house in town where the residents went all out and probably spent thousands of dollars getting the place perfect for Halloween. Now, this place was really insanely well done, and I mean really freaking good. Albeit, even as an adult, it competed with professional haunted houses. I believe the year was either 1999 or 2000, because I went as Darth Maul. I remember being literally scared out of my mind the previous few years, and I hoped the badassery my character would provide me with some sort of courage. They blocked off the scene with a black tarp and had everything you could ever want to see in such house. A psycho shower killing scene with a zombie crawling out of a toilet, ghouls and demons climbing the tree, blood, gore, strobes, fog, everything. I remember feeling terrified even with my double lightsaber. Even though I was scared to death to walk through it, I always admired the workmanship, as I knew that the props they had done were either really expensive or took some good effort to make. To this day, I haven't never seen anyone who had as horrible as a yard as they did. As always, every year, I saw the house owners sitting on their porch reveling in the terror they had brought to the neighborhood and handing out candy. So as I nervously crossed the yard past flying banshees and impaled corpses, I noticed the main attraction at the end of the line. There, on what I guess was probably the driveway, was the bottomless pit attraction. The illusion bewildered and chilled me, and I thought it was only lit by the lone light bulb there. It was a box glow like a burning furnace. I must have stared at it for a while when suddenly I heard a cough and a low hushed voice at my right. I don't really remember what was said, but I want to say it sounded like something like, "Hey, check this out," or "Hey, I want to show you something," in a dark, rough, hoarse tone. I looked over and at first saw nothing but the wide gate to what was clearly the side of the owner's house. There was just a faint amount of light from the glowing pit to illuminate the outlines of the gated fence. After adjusting my eyes, I noticed a figure standing completely still. In fact, it was so still, I remember thinking it was just another static prop. My young mind just didn't register a lot of this and was still looking for the voice I heard, not realizing it had come from the figure, I, who could still only barely make out. After a few moments, I heard the voice again. I realized it came from the figure and began to approach it. It was obviously a stupid idea in comparison to everything else that was happening around me. This figure seemed anything but imposing, so I cautiously approached the figure, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly the figure began to move, and I froze solid. The light from the amber glow lit up its face just enough for me to make out its features. This I remember clearly. It was a scraggly and rough-looking man with a coarse, gray beard and yellow teeth. His withered and tattered clothing looked like he hasn't been changed in ages. He was smiling at me, though I had no idea why, but it settled me great under the hellish glow of the light bulb behind me. I felt wrong. It was as if at that moment I had acquired some clarity and realized his presence here was obviously not part of the show, and considering I already saw the owners clearly did not belong on this property. I screamed and ran out of there as fast as I could to the exit, not looking behind for a second. I probably got a few kids to look at me, but as I found my parents waiting outside, I told them the man I saw. I saw one of the owners approach and ask if everything was alright. I said something like, "I don't like the old man by the gate." He looked at me for a second and went, "What man?" I never went there again. Let's not meet, creepy shadow man.